Many people think of Malcolm X as a prominent, perhaps radical, civil rights activist of the late 1950s and early 60s. Some people summarize him as another Martin Luther King Jr. and don't think much more about it. We've seen the iconic X on merchandise worn by people from all walks of life, from the poverty-stricken to the Hollywood elite. However, there is much more behind the commonly idolized figure than meets the mainstream eye. There is no doubt that Malcolm X had a huge impact on Black culture and will remain an immortal part of American history as the echoes of his legacy still live today in ongoing civil rights movements. Born in 1925 in Nebraska, Malcolm Little grew up during one of the hardest times for African Americans in history. His father was a Baptist pastor, which only added to their struggle. White supremacists tormented Malcolm's father, forcing them to flee to Michigan. But the prejudice didn't stop, and eventually the family home was burnt to the ground. When Malcolm was just 6 years old, his father was mysteriously found dead. Justice was never served, and Malcolm grew into an angry and rebellious young man. As a teenager in the 1940s, then living in New York City, Malcolm had dropped out of school. He struggled to embrace his Black heritage and attempted to conform to a white image. He often had his hair straightened at the barber shop, and he dated white women. He soon joined a gang, sold and used drugs, became violent, and lived a life of crime. He was arrested at the age of 22 for the second time, sentenced to 10 years in prison for robbery, and served 7. In prison, he meets someone who introduces him to the Nation of Islam, otherwise known as NOI, a fairly new African American religious movement. NOI practices parts of Islam, but focuses on civil rights and Black power in an extreme form, often to the point of identifying white people as the devil. Malcolm begins reading books, researching, and educating himself more about human rights and the Islamic religion. He's also listening to the teachings of his new friend, as well as the leader of the NOI, Elijah Muhammad, who he becomes pen pals with while he's in prison. Malcolm starts to seriously question his identity as a Black man as he learns all these new ideas. He's inspired to question everything. For the first time in his life, he is empowered to be a better Black man, and he commits himself to the Nation of Islam. Malcolm leaves prison with a new name and a religion that he feels is the purpose of his life to share. Once someone converts to Islam, they often change all or part of their name. Malcolm chose X to symbolize his lost tribal name. He finally gets to meet Elijah Muhammad, the leader and last prophet of the Nation of Islam, whom at that point he idolizes. He begins working for him and being mentored by him regularly. He begins preaching and gaining popularity as he lifts up the Black community to believe in themselves and fight for justice. Malcolm really is a new man. In his early years of being in the Nation of Islam, things are going great for him. He's a changed man and believes it is all due to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad teaching him about Allah and about his own power. He begins practicing civil disobedience and no longer engages in violence. In 1958, he marries a Black woman, Betty Sanders, and starts his family. He remains faithful to his wife. He takes care of himself, his family, and his community like his religion teaches him to do. He embraces his heritage as an African American and finds pride in who he is and where he came from, all while remaining humble. It appears that his newfound faith is working wonders in his life, and he finally is happy. Malcolm is ordained as an African American Muslim minister. He was very successful as a minister and speaker. His message contrasted Martin Luther King's at first because he didn't believe in turning the other cheek and loving your enemy. NOI membership grows from 500 in 1952 to 30,000 in 1963. With television now being in most American homes, Malcolm X soon becomes a controversial media target. It doesn't take long for Malcolm's fame to surpass that of Elijah Muhammad. The Nation of Islam has evolved into a real organization at this time. It gets big, and many people are vying for power. Jealousy creeps in, and for the first time, Malcolm has some serious enemies. Undercover FBI agents infiltrated the organization to monitor the group's activities. No doubt they were looking for incriminating evidence to shut down the growing Black Pride organization. Malcolm soon begins to notice a shift in the ideology of the religious movement. He believes that corruption and deceit are creeping in. Then, in 1963, he learns that his mentor, the leader of the Nation of Islam, Prophet Elijah Muhammad, had multiple illegitimate children with several of his young secretaries. This scandal jolted Malcolm into the next realm of his journey, to question the one he idolizes and to reevaluate his life's purpose. He spends some time quietly contemplating his choices. He can't look past the deception and decides to leave the NOI in early 1964 to start a new organization, Muslim Mosque Inc. This sparks the beginning of the death threats. He decides this will be a good time to fulfill the fifth pillar of Islam and take his pilgrimage to Mecca, Saudi Arabia. He sets off on a 5-week personal spiritual journey. On his pilgrimage, Malcolm discovers the authentic Islam of universal respect and brotherhood, an Islam that embraces all people, regardless of color. He witnesses that it is possible for different religions and races to coexist peacefully and unsegregated. This changed Malcolm's worldview completely. When he returned, he publicly let it be known that he would no longer follow the Nation of Islam's separatist beliefs, but instead had converted to traditional Islam and would embrace equality for all. The Nation of Islam viewed Malcolm's new theology, which was closer to Martin Luther King's views, as betrayal. There are soon several attempts to assassinate him. To try to gain more protection for himself and his family, and to further disassociate himself from the corrupt NOI, he publicly denounces Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam on their wrongdoings. This only perpetuates the feud, and the next assassination attempt is successful. Because of his many diverse life experiences, Malcolm grew up to be a man of deep thought. He was able to reflect on his mistakes and learn from them. He showed his followers and the world what an oppressed minority is capable of if they are willing to change, have an open mind, learn moral judgment, build integrity, and have the willpower to take action for the sake of others. Malcolm X rose up to be a vital part of the civil rights movement at a time when the movement was finally gaining steam and African Americans were filled with hope. Boycotts, sit-ins, and desegregation were part of daily news headlines. Malcolm X empowered the Black community to take a stance against white supremacy and racism by engaging in civil disobedience. His message was twofold in that it wasn't just about Black power and fighting for justice. It was about creating a new culture for the Black community by improving oneself through living a certain lifestyle of consistent learning, overall well-being, avoiding drugs and violence, becoming educated, and having a spiritual life. Since his death, Malcolm X has become immortalized. Time magazine called the autobiography of Malcolm X, released just 4 months after his death, one of the most important books of the 20th century. When hip-hop and rap emerged in the 70s and 80s, many frustrated young men quoted Malcolm X in their music. In the early 90s, Spike Lee's movie Malcolm X, starring Denzel Washington, became a blockbuster. Many people from all walks of life, including President Barack Obama, credit Malcolm X as having influenced their drive for self-empowerment and the resulting success. Malcolm X's life and legacy continue to inspire African American rights groups to this day, from the Black Panther Party to the Black Lives Matter movement. Today, he is known as one of the most influential African Americans in history, and that fact is made clear in the images and quotes displayed in art and pop culture all over the world. Thanks for watching.